Hello and welcome to a completely useless Warhammer 3 tier list. I'm still very new to the game. I'm nowhere near equipped to make any sort of tier list that's well-informed and meaningful as to say the competitive strength, or I suppose I should say comparative strength, of various factions, since it is mostly a single-player game. And that's normally the sort of min-maxy optimizing stuff I sink my teeth into, but I'm new to the game. I'm bad. I can't possibly say that with any degree of certainty. However, it'd be neat to look back once I have played all the factions and see how much disparity there was between my initial bright-eyed enthusiasm or ignorance and lack of enthusiasm because I just didn't know what to expect properly versus what actually happens once I get to play these factions. So with any tier list, you need to start by explaining what the various tiers mean, and let's start with not available because I should have an opinion about everyone, even if it is no opinion. I can't give a first impression hype level for factions I've already played. Now, as the rest of this list, it's literally just a hype meter. It doesn't really require the level of breakdown that most things do. But I will say that there's going to be a lot of holes in my knowledge, because if you were to look at the Warhammer 3 faction screens, they do a really bad job of explaining unique mechanics to you. As an example, Grom the Paunch has a cauldron. It does stuff. It's barely mentioned on his screen, but I'm pretty sure it's very important to his campaign. So there are tons of mechanics that are not properly explained in a faction's launch page. So I'm going off of a very little information. How is this communicated to a new player? How much do I care about these things? And as somebody who loves min-maxing and having it matter, I really look forward to playing Taurox and to a lesser degree the rest of the Beastmen. This is going to happen to some other factions as well, but typically I really like the Beastmen roster. I'm a big fan of the Monstrous Infantry stuff right now. I'm not a huge fan of basic bitch units and archers, even though I really appreciate how efficient archers are. So when I see somebody who specializes in Monstrous Infantry, I get hyped about that. And because Taurox is the coolest by far of the Beastmen at a glance, it sort of pushes down the other Beastmen. If Taurox wasn't here, somebody else would probably have climbed up. That somebody else, by the way, would have been Morgur, because I'm still very hyped up playing Morgur, because I'm a big fan of powerful and unique Lord-type characters, or heroes, doesn't really matter, same diff. And Morgur is very different looking at a glance with his Mortis Engine effect to almost any other Lord, I think, in the game. There are very few that just have damage auras built around them, and that encourages a very different sort of campaign style. As for Malagor and Khazrak, I'm just kind of hyped for them. I have other Beastmen I'm more enthusiastic about. That's really what's holding them down. It's not that I look at them and think they're going to be particularly lame. I like their rosters, they seem fine as Lords, but there seem to be explicitly cooler Beastmen that I could be playing is how I feel about them. And that is sort of how I feel about the entirety of Bretonnia. I'm playing Warhammer Fantasy. I'm playing a game where, like, the Holy Roman Empire with magic is one of the most boring factions in the world. And this is actually not even, like, England with magic. This is just mythological England, point blank. It is the least interesting faction in the game at a thematic level. And the thing it specializes in, cavalry, is something that feels clunky as hell and really unpleasant in this game. That really is pretty much my whole opinion on Bretonnia. But I will say that Alberic does actually get downgraded even further, because while none of the lords stand out with their abilities, Alberic does stand out as being alone in Lustria for some reason, meaning that his diplomatic prospects are trash. He's not going to get to confederate any other legendary lords very easily, going to be surrounded by allies using cavalry and jungle maps. It just sounds like a disaster. Going over to the newest faction, the Chaos Dwarves, I'm really enthusiastic about these three. Their roster seems really diverse, although like the Beastmen, I don't really see a ton that makes them super distinct from one another. So whoever's the best sort of drowns out the others to a small degree. But I'm going to be honest, looking at all of them rather extensively, none of them stand out to me in any meaningful way, and I feel like I just want to put all three of them into very hype. Because I'm not kind of hype, I really feel good about their roster, their lore of magic, their unique abilities, the way their mechanics seem to work. But none of them stand out as being anything more or less than that. They all have start positions that don't look particularly bad, they all have abilities that don't look super impactful. On the whole, I'm about the same level of hype for all the Chaos Dwarves. And realistically, that means I'll end up playing the guy who has the best economy first, and these two will get less hype because they'll just be getting played second. Like, they're only in kind of hype as opposed to very hype, but it's strictly because I know I won't be playing them first. If I view them as being so similar, I'll be playing the one that I think is marginally better first. Next up, we have Daniel the Demon Prince. And, oh man, it seems like such a cool idea, but you can tell just like the first time you boot up Warhammer 3, and you have like all the demon factions, and you have the Warriors of Chaos, and then you have the Demons of Chaos, and it's just Daniel, but like there's Azazel and Valkia in the demons, and there's demons were the factions. And Daniel's like, no, I promise I'm not Bellacore, I'm special. Like, you can see that something mechanically is off a little bit. And everything I hear in the community is just like, oh yeah, that guy's mechanics aren't fleshed out. So really what I look at when I see Daniel is a faction that plays like everyone else in the Chaos Waste to some degree, except he has no Confederation prospects and a really half-baked mechanic. Like, realistically, he probably deserves to be a not hype instead of expect pain. But I have no enthusiasm at all about Daniel, and I think the reason it's going to be painful for me is because I'm going to play Daniel, and I'm going to constantly be thinking about how much better it could have been, and how I could probably just install a mod that makes it not suck. Like, I think Daniel is going to hurt more because of what it could be than what it actually is, but I'm not enthusiastic at all about this faction. It doesn't even feel like it should be its own faction in the first place. Coming over to the Dark Elves, I'm tempted to put the whole damn pile of them in just somewhere between no opinion and expect pain. However, I probably just throw Malice Darkblade all the way into max hype because I'm really enthusiastic about particularly powerful characters. If you tell me that I have a legendary lord that can one-man doomstack with almost no investment, I'm like, oh cool, I'm going to enjoy playing that campaign quite a lot then. So he's going to end up very high in anticipation for you compared to the rest of them. The fact that you get a lot more of the Black Arcs and the mobile recruiting, to me, is going to make it much more enjoyable to play Lokir Fellheart than the rest of these people as well, I'd expect. But as for the rest of the Dark Elves, these people don't really stand out to me. They don't immediately and obviously look unpleasant. I've heard bad things about the slave mechanic, and I would say that public opinion has almost colored me into not hype for this. And if I were in a more cynical mood, I'd probably put all 4 of them into not hype. I will say that specifically Malekith probably deserves to be a not hype. I've heard that the Dark Elves just refuse to confederate, so being the diplomacy Dark Elf sounds like it's just a slap in the face. But on the whole, I really don't have an opinion on the Dark Elves. It's the sort of thing where after I play the first one, like if I play any of them, no one confederates, the slave mechanic's awful. After I play Malice or Fellheart, I just drop all of these down to not hype, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna wait for the rework on that one. But right now, no opinion is the honest answer on the Dark Elves. So I criticize Bretonnia for just being Arthurian legend. Dwarves are literally just dwarves. They're like standard Lord of the Rings dwarves, except with memes about grudges. They're fine. I don't dislike them at a fundamental level, but since they don't have monstrous infantry, they don't get magic, they don't really get cavalry, like they specialize in all the sorts of stuff that's efficient but not fun, and doesn't allow for much skill expression, right? They don't seem particularly powerful or particularly engaging. I don't think they're going to end up being bad. I'm just... Alright, one difference. I think playing as Grombrindle is going to suck. You tell me that you're distinguished from the rest of your faction by the fact that you're in the core of the map surrounded by people who hate you with no diplomatic prospects and you're never confederating a damn thing. It's like, oh cool, so you just made the campaign a lot less fun. All of these factions where they start off completely an island from the rest of their kin, or just without anyone who would consider themselves kin to begin with, like with the Demon Lords, get to be a lot less fun. It's like an automatic downgrade of an entire tier almost immediately when you're an island. As for the rest of the dwarves, I am kind of hyped for Ungrim and his focus on Slayers. The lower upkeep cost for them, the better stats for them in his army, the increase in speed for infantry, all of that really does make Ungrim seem like the one that's going to be the most fun to play. Additionally, he's very close to a bunch of the other dwarves, allowing for a lot of diplomacy. The rest of the dwarves, though, just hard and no opinion. I look at them, they're dwarves. I really wish you had monstrous infantry or magic, you know, the things that really make Warhammer stand out as a game, just not in this faction. You'll notice that the new dwarves, the cooler dwarves, all have monstrous infantry and magic, the shit the game's about. And I believe it's the last of our criminally boring factions with the Empire up next. And I think I want to put... I know the rework is coming with the next DLC, but I want to put everyone using Imperial Authority into Expect Pain. I've played near the Empire as the vampire counts now. It looks like a nightmare. The Imperial Authority thing seems like a really bad idea. Like originally, I can see in Warhammer 1, you sit down, you play the Empire, Festus isn't there, the forces of chaos aren't as threatening, Dryka's not there. Like, we've added so many enemies next to the Empire over the course of the game that the idea of a stable, healthy Empire is a complete farce, and trying to manage that expectation from the game sounds terrible. Now, as for the other two factions, the Cult of Sigmar, I'm not hyped for. They're just guys. And sure, they're guys, like, using the Tomb King mechanic to get the books of Nagash, and they're not near everyone else, but again, not being near everyone else isn't a good thing. I'm not hyped about this. I'm not convinced they're going to be bad, I'm not expecting pain, but I would rather find a reason to play someone other than Cult of Sigmar. However, in a harsh contrast to my normal statements about islands, I'm actually kinda hype about Marcus Wolfheart. Because unlike all the other island factions, Marcus Wolfheart has automatic hatred with all the lizard men. He has a limited selection of units, and he's given additional units by the Empire. He's got really unique things where his army's particularly good at doing ambushes and has cheap upkeep for the units to be using in them. I really, really like just how extraordinarily differentiated his campaign looks. Because with people like Ron Brindle, I look at their campaign and I'm like, oh, it's just a dwarf, but in the wrong place. This is actually a colony of the Empire. There are mechanics to enforce that actual thematic idea. You didn't just take campaign A and put it in location B. You actually made a new campaign that should play in a unique way. And it also doesn't have the Imperial Authority mechanic, which I'm really looking forward to. So on the whole, I'm way more hyped about Marcus Wolfheart than the rest of the Empire. When it comes to Grand Cathay, I'm really surprised to say this. Just hard no opinion. I spent a while looking at all the legendary lords and really thinking, like, is there nothing about this that seems more interesting? And what I expected is they're particularly guilty of the sin of having the campaign start menu just not tell you what the campaign is. Because if you start a campaign as Grand Cathay, there's nothing in the starting screen that tells you about caravans or whatever the hell the harmony mechanic is. And realistically, I am kinda hyped for the power creep faction from them, because when I hear it's stronger, that means I get to do crazier stuff, and actually, I'm gonna escalate that to very hype, not because I know they're gonna be the strongest, but because they have a split faction start, and that is infinitely more interesting than just being in the wrong place, because now you have a choice about how aggressively you're gonna try to hold that additional land. And essentially, you start with far, far more opportunity for skill expression with a split campaign start. So I'm pretty hype about that from like an optimization standpoint. Just a slightly stronger variant of the faction with a lot of room for like weird military decisions. But with the rest of it, the game just hasn't conveyed to me anything. Seriously, it's wild. This is what you get told when you pick Miao Ying. And similarly, this is for Zhao Ming and this is for Yuan Bo. And you would think that they would really tell you about all the cool stuff that does seem like it's probably a part of the faction, but I literally have to start their campaign to find out anything about what they actually do. And as much as I like optimizing, I hear ammunition plus 20%, that's obviously good. Corruption -2 when you're up against chaos, that's obviously good. This isn't interesting. The campaign has utterly failed to tell me why I should give a shit about Grand Cathay. And I could look into it. I could get a more accurate answer, but that's not the point of this tier list. This is a hype meter, and if I have to do research to get hype, then honestly I should be moving them down, not up. Moving on to the greenskins, I'm actually kind of hyped. Not even kind of hyped, I'm very hyped about specifically Grimgor and Skarsnitch. Grimgor seems like he's the orkiest of the orcs, the Black Orc Warboss stuff, and Skarsnitch is differentiated by straight up just not using orcs and being a goblin faction. That's just like a tremendously different gameplay pattern than the rest of the orcs. However, for the other three, I'm kind of hyped about Grom the Paunch, like on the edge of very hyped. And the other two, I do think the greenskins look cool and I think I'll enjoy playing them. I'm enthusiastic about the WoW mechanic. But with Grom the Paunch, like it's so close, but I'm not actually very hyped about it. Because at this point, I just view Grom the Paunch as like a mechanic a bunch of the factions are going to have. Because for other people, they're like, oh yeah, Grom the Paunch is mechanic again. But for me, it's like, oh, it's just this mechanic that a bunch of factions have. So I'm really not super hyped about Grom the Paunch's Cauldron as a main thing, because I know a bunch of people have it. It's just a thing some factions have. And to me, he's just another orc. Whereas I'm way more enthusiastic about the Black Orc Warbosses and the Goblin-only stuff with these two factions. Getting into the High Elves, I am actually very hyped about Elitha Nar and Emmerich specifically. I find both of those factions to be really interesting. I think Elitha Nar is much more interesting because it's not on Ulthuan, but it does play sort of like a typical High Elf. I'm interested in the way that faction plays. It's the less safe, cooler version of the High Elves in my mind. And Emrich's just in a completely different place, but I believe it's possible for him to get back to Ulthuan and start confederating with relative ease. So that's very cool. In addition, he has the unique mechanic about wielding dragons and having a monster-focused army. And as you have heard with my bitching about the dwarves, sign me up. I'm hyped about that. I'm still kind of hyped about Eltharion, though, because of the Grom the Paunch defeat trait, making him quite good at confederating the other high elves, being the high elf who has the most good fighting to do, because all the other ones are kind of awkward with their opening turns not killing the other high elves. With Eltharion, there's no shortage of people to fight constantly. It feels the most proactive of the Ulthuan campaigns. With Ilariel, I have no strong opinion on her. I don't think it's going to be unfun. I just don't really think anything at all about her. And with Teclis, I'm actively not hyped. I don't know what it is about Teclis. It might just be that he's defined by being a Lord Master of Hoeth, and in my campaign, when I played Tyrion, I basically never built them and never got use out of them. It's that his start is an island, mostly. Like, he's not with any of the other high elves, a faction defined by diplomacy by and large. He's out on his own, he can't get back easily, he's fighting really threatening enemies. He doesn't seem to have much going for him from an optimization standpoint, at least not at a glance, not without starting the campaign and finding out about all the mechanics that wasn't told about. So I'm just not hyped about Teclis compared to any of the other high elves. Next up, we got Khorne. Let's just throw that into max hype right away. I am a big fan of monstrous infantry and monsters. I don't know if Khorne has magic. I don't actually think they do. I think they're just a good old-fashioned violent sort of gang. But Khorne is basically the same boat as Tarux. They have, it seems to me at least, very similar playstyles. And I'm all about that. I'm looking forward to playing some hyper-aggressive Horde factions in the near future. There's a good chance that Khorne's going to be one of my first campaigns on Legendary. Because let's be honest with ourselves, my first campaign is the Trickster on Legendary. Like, are you really on the highest difficulty if you can't lose? Let's not kid ourselves. Going over to Kislev, let's just start by putting Boris Ursus in the expect pain category. This is a secret character, not because it needed to be a secret character, but just to make absolutely sure new players didn't pick this because the start seems absolutely apocalyptically bad. Like, why is he a Horde faction surrounded by enemies? What are you talking about? With all the other Horde factions, you look at stuff like these guys, and yeah, they can be Horde factions. They're really good at killing stuff. This guy? No, not at all. He's just a Kislevite faction. He's not special. I've been debating it for a while, and I think there might be no opinion on all the Kislevite factions other than Boris Ursus. I think Mother Osaka and the Cauldron just barely gets her into kinda hype. But with the other ones, where they're just, side by side with someone you can't declare war on, it's not really diplomacy if you're forced to confederate them immediately and can't get dowed by them, right? It's fake diplomacy. So the stuff with Kislev and the schism in their church, I don't find it very interesting. I find it makes their starts less interesting by far, and their faction roster is not super interesting or diverse. I'm only kinda hyped. This is the low end of kind of hype for Ostankia, and I'm just not hyped for Kislev at all. So getting into the Lizardmen, just, I guess by coincidence, I'm the most hype about all of the Kroxigor lords. Gore Rock, I'm interested in because of the Saris focus. Oh, I'm sorry, not Gore Rock, Kroq-Gar. I'm sorry, easy mistake to make. I'm also hyped about Kroq-Gar for starting with Lord Kroak, as well as the, pretty much just that, but I hear the phrase, Lord's army gains 15% in unit mass, and I'm just like, I don't even understand. I want to know. I want to see if that has any discernible effect, or if it's just memes. And I'm also very, very hyped about playing Nakai, because being a completely unique Horde faction separated from the rest of his campaign, again, it's the thing where if you're an island, that sucks unless you're an island with unique mechanics, and Nakai the Wanderer is. I'm still fairly hyped, I would say, about Tic-Tac-Toe. Not like very hyped, but kind of hyped about Tic-Tac-Toe. Just because it's such a weird thing to like get flying doom stacks early and focus on campaign movement. And since there are so many Lizardmen, he's not actually alone. He's got friends, one of which could be Oxyotl. They can come up relatively soon and join up and help him out. And Oxyotl has like a really unique start and a very unique army, and admittedly it seems unique in ways that are objectively painful, but he also gets to teleport across the map, and that's worth a lot. So I'm interested in seeing how Oxyotl plays, and it's going to be very, very different from the rest of them. As for the last two, for Mazda Mundi and the Cult of Sotek, no opinion. Like, they're still Lizardmen. I find the Lords to be boring. I think the Cult of Sotek might have a lot of crazy shit going on with unique campaign mechanics. I can't tell by looking at the start screen. It's not doing a good job being the cover for this book. But at a glance, the Lords don't seem interesting or powerful compared to other Lords. There's nothing on the immediate opening that stands out to me, as also nothing where I've just coincidentally, by being in the community, picked up on things, get hyped about with them. The only reason they're not falling into not hype is because the Lizardmen are an absolutely awesome faction. How could you not love dinosaurs riding dinosaurs? It's just stupid in the best possible way. Getting into Norska, I have absolutely no opinion about Wulfric. Wulfric looks like a trash faction that if you weren't paying attention, you'd be like, oh, that was a legendary lord. He just doesn't excite me in any way when I read what's going on about him. Whereas at least with Throg, I'm like, oh shit, Ice Troll army, let's go, we got a thing. It's not super hyped, but no one else is running an Ice Troll army. No other lords or trolls. Throg at least feels a little bit unique. And I'm sure Wulfric's not as bad as he looks. That's why he's not going in not hype or expect pain. But he just seems so woefully generic when there are so many random Norskin cities that didn't get to be factions. But Wulfric is special, we promise. I thought I was being unfair to him, so I checked again to see what he does. He makes Mammoth slightly better and has slightly cheaper Marauders. Yeah, no, I don't feel bad at all about saying Wulfric's boring as sin and doesn't look interesting. He might have cool mechanics. God knows Cathay probably does, and he's just not telling you about them. And if that's the case, then welcome to No Opinion. Convey what you're about next time. Nurgle goes into expect pain. Nurgle's getting a rework with the next DLC, and I believe that. I don't look at Nurgle and see anything interesting from it from a lore perspective. When I go up against all the other factions, I'm like, oh cool, Slaanesh has unarmored fast guys. So that's what this demon's about. Khorne just has big damaging melee guys. Tzeentch has barrier. Nurgle has slow units with more health. Like, the thing Nurgle does isn't interesting or fun at a straightforward level. And when I hear everyone talking about how they're just one of the weakest factions in the game that isn't mechanically interesting, has low room for skill expression due to the nature of its units, doesn't have anything going for it in either complexity or power, it's just sad. It's unsurprising that one of the 4 Chaos Lords would suck, but it's still sad to see it all the same. Yeah, Ogre Kingdoms just go straight into not hype. I was paying attention when Warhammer 3 was being developed, and most of the community were shocked that these guys got to be their own faction and not mercenaries. Maybe not most of the community. A vocal part of the Reddit, at the very least. And that's how I feel about them. Like, they aren't super interesting from a lore perspective. Their stuff, as far as their faction is concerned, doesn't seem super interesting. They don't necessarily look weak. They just look thematically lame with nothing particularly insane about their unit roster. So I find myself woefully uninteresting in them. So yeah, not hype, not even no opinion, thematically lame, nothing unique and powerful about their roster that stands out to me. Welcome to not hype. Which brings us to the Skaven. And I'm going to be honest with you. Let's just move all of them up to kinda hype and then scroll up, because we're going to need to be... You can't see the top anymore. Here was the sales pitch, effectively, for me with Warhammer 3. Or Warhammer in general. It's the reason I bought Warhammer back when Warhammer 2 was around, but never got around to playing it. It was the Skaven. It was like, hey, we have a faction that's twice as many units as everyone else. They're all garbage. They also are ratmen. They have tons of machine guns. The machine guns may or may not have unlimited ammo. Friendly fire is not a problem. We have more rats, and those rats are probably scheming to kill you anyway. We also have nukes, biologically engineered super mutants, assassins. One of our clans, like one of the special ones, its power is friendship. They just don't backstab each other, and that's terrifying to all the other rats. And the Skaven are wonderfully stupid. They are the best part of Warhammer lore, and everything about them in the tactical game is like beautifully ridiculous in a way that I absolutely adore. None of them are going under kinda hype, and realistically, if you asked all but one of these factions, no matter which one you left me with, it would be going to max hype, because I'm really enthusiastic about the Skaven lore. And also the playstyle of grossly overinvesting into range and artillery and then jumping through crazy hoops to try to protect it is also very interesting. For me, it's Clan Scryer and Clan Molder that are easily the most interesting of the lot. Those two, with their focus on guns and body horror, definitely seem the coolest by far. That wasn't Clan Molder, that was Clan Pestilence. Let's get that sorted out. I'm definitely still very hyped about playing Clan Eshin. Their glass cannon assassin lord with stalk is fairly unique amongst lords. Their army and their shadowy dealings both feel like they're going to play very differently from the other ones. If I knew more about shadowy dealings from the campaign introduction screen, they might have made it to max hype. But it's just like, oh, by the way, they exist. It barely mentions them. As for the other 3 clans, I'm still kinda hyped for them. Skaven are badass. I love the Skaven. But compared to the top 3 Skaven, Clan Moors, Clan Richter, and Clan Pestilence, I think I got those flags right, are not nearly as interesting. I have, like, some factions don't even have 3 lords, right? Looking at you, Ogre Kingdoms, looking at you, Norska. I have more S-tier Skavens than some factions have clans or lords at all. So it just sort of muddies the hype a lot for the less interesting Skaven, because I'll be getting to these guys after I've already seen 3 campaigns of Skaven. This brings us to the Seducers of Slaanesh, and I'm not hyped about N'Kari, unfortunately. N'Kari should be cool, but I have a problem, and that's that I really, really dislike low armor glass cannon units. My experience has been the tankier my units, the more enjoyable the game is, and the softer they are, the more unfun it is. When I go up against Daemonettes of Slaanesh, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, they're going to fall apart immediately. This is going to be an easy fight. When I see high armored units, I stress out. And when I see Slaanesh armies, I'm like, oh, good, it's not one of the real Chaos Gods. And that's likely something that's going to change with experience and time, especially after playing some factions like N'Kari that are forced to use these units. But my overwhelming impression when I look at a unit roster that doesn't have armor is like, all right, I don't think you can make an army out of glass. They might all be glass cannons, but it's still a glass army, and that feels like a bad deal. I don't think this is going to work. And that's why I'm not hyped about N'Kari specifically. Getting into the Tomb Kings, and this might be heresy, because I can appreciate that the Tomb Kings seem cool. I solidly have at best no opinion for any of them. They don't strike me as interesting. Confederation and diplomacy aren't really a big thing for them because only 2 of them are really on the same team. Kalida's across the world, and Arkan the Black hates the other ones. So there's not a lot of diplomacy happening with them. Their unit roster seems interesting, but at the same time, it's not super interesting compared to a lot of other stuff in the game. I don't like chariots, I think, is a big part of it. Once I play them, I'll get better with chariot control, and I'll understand chariots more, and I'll probably be more enthusiastic about them as a faction. I expect if I were to continue playing Warhammer 3 for a year, and a year from now rank all the factions I played, Cetra's probably going to rank higher than No Opinion. But in terms of starting the campaign, I'm like, yeah, let's see if there's somebody more interesting we could pick, right? There's a lot of other things in the game I haven't played yet. Do we really need to play the Tomb Kings right now? Because their Lord screens just do not get me hyped. Nothing about them stands out as super interesting compared to the rest of the game. They're trying to sell me really hard on the fantasy of dead pharaohs, but that's honestly not that crazy. It's just mythologized pharaohs of Egypt. The Skaven are absolutely wild. If you're going to sell me on theme, you've already lost because you're not coming in number 1 in that race. I think I am kinda hyped about Tzeentch, about Kairos Fate Reaver specifically, because I just like barrier as a mechanic. Like I said a while ago, I like armor. I like tanky units. Slaanesh being frail freaks me out and makes me nervous and uncomfortable with my armies, and barrier is the complete opposite. And sure, you can tell me that the game is balanced and units with barrier are not actually just insane compared to units without armor, and I know intuitively that what you're telling me is true, but it doesn't mean it feels good. Additionally, Tzeentch feels like they have a very wide and diverse roster of weird shit that's just powerful. I assume that the lore of Tzeentch must be one of the best schools of magic in the game, because I haven't seen it, but he is the literal, or they, I don't think Tzeentch has a gender now that I say it out loud. I assume they have the best school of magic as they are the chaos god of magic. It would be weird if they didn't have at least something on par with life magic and vampire magic, right? So I am kinda hyped about Tzeentch, but because it's that vague sort of optimism about their lore of magic and their unit roster and nothing to do with Kairos Fate Reaver specifically, they're only kinda hype. I'm not super impressed about it, and part of it's that the Chaos Lords all have the same problem. Like, Khorne gets through it, right? Khorne's just a really interesting faction in terms of trying to get as much as you can out of them. But none of them have diplomacy, and that sort of just blows, right? It's not fun to be told you don't get access to a major portion of the game of Confederation. You never get a second legendary lord. It's just gonna be normal lords. It's more fun when you have potential allies, and Tzeentch doesn't. And I think that's a big part of why Kairos Fate Reaver is all the way down here instead of making it up to very hype. Getting into the vampires, and specifically the Vampire Coast, let's take Count Noctilus and the Vampirates all the way up to maximum hype. There's no way in hell I'm not looking forward to that. I don't want to play it now because I just played Ulthuan, and I don't want to stay in the same geographical location. I want to see all of the map before I start backtracking, which is why Tarak doesn't have to wait for a while to get played because I've already been there. But the Vampire Pirates just seem like such a fucking cool faction, and I feel like Count Noctilus is the most vampire pirate out of all the vampirates, right? It's not even close. He's the one that most powerfully embodies that identity. And the only one who's close, by the way, is Luther Harkon. Because he's actually a vampire, right? Like, he is actually a vampire and a pirate, and the other two are only one of those things. I'm not even convinced that one of them's a pirate. Let's talk about that for a second. This is definitely a pirate. I don't remember their names very clearly, but this is Ursula from The Little Mermaid. I'm not actually convinced she is either a vampire or a pirate. Although the faction is not called Vampire Pirates, it is called Vampire Coast, and she most definitely is associated with water, so I can't take that away from her. But yeah, thematically, just absolute failures, not hyped about them at all. In terms of their locations on the map, their diplomatic prospects, they're both basically islands. Which you would think wouldn't be as big of a deal for the vampire pirates who can obviously sail the seas and find them. But still, it doesn't feel super important to do that. It doesn't feel like... It feels like that's something I can do here, that I could go sail over to them as this faction. But as these two, it doesn't feel like I want to get on a boat and sail the world. So I'm very hyped about the actual vampire pirates, but the ones that are just like tagging along in the faction, I honestly dislike that they're even in the faction. It's sort of how I feel about Daniel the Demon Prince. I don't feel like this guy should have his own faction. And I feel like these two are just like rogue factions. They got glorified and didn't have anywhere else to call a home than vampire pirates. Which brings us to the vampire accounts. And I am not hype about playing vampire accounts, unfortunately. Just solidly, absolutely not hyped about playing a second campaign of vampire accounts. It's not because they're weak. God forbid anyone ever suggests such a thing. They're very strong. They are, quite frankly, too strong, and it makes the game boring. You can summon your armies instantly. Your armies are just cheap, expendable chaff to guard your lords for you and your heroes. So, yeah, they're very, very good. I will say specifically, I think that the Barrow Legion and Manfred actually do have like unique campaign mechanics and diplomatic prospects that make them no opinion. Like, even though I expect them to be very easy, I don't dislike them the way I dislike Helman Gorst. Helman Gorst just feels like a random faction off to the side. Just some necromancers like, guys, you're really just the undead faction, right? Can I join? And it's like, yeah, sure. We've only got 3 real heroes because Vlad and Isabella are just, you know, the married couple hero. They're not really 2 separate people. We need some more people in the faction. Get in here. And I have no hype whatsoever about this island faction. They're going to be easy. They're not going to be diplomatically interesting. They're going to focus on the worst part of the faction, which is the undead as opposed to the heroes. I don't have hype for them because they're too strong. That's really all it is. And I get if that feels mutually exclusive with like liking Tarox and Khorne. And the difference is I feel like these people probably use their armies, right? Because like when you lose your armies with these guys, you got them this turn. They cost nothing. It didn't matter. There's nothing you can lose that matters with these guys. It's not as bad as the Trickster's Cult, but it's still pretty egregious just how resilient these factions are in addition to their strength. I'm not going to dwell on this anymore. I think I'm already rambling, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Let's move on to a less powerful faction. Oh, right, Warriors of Chaos. No, we're not doing that then. The difference being that Warriors of Chaos are actually much more interesting to me, because again, when they lose their incredibly high quality units, that fucking matters to them. You can't just recruit 20 of them instantly for like maybe 1,500 dark magic, right? You need to actually invest over time to get these units. Not all the Warriors of Chaos can confederate. It's just Be'lakor and Archaon, and because of that, they're diplomatically much more interesting. They still have like really strong lords and access to really powerful and interesting unit progression. However, they also get to have diplomatic interactions with other people. That might be beating them into the dirt and demanding you join the army, but that's still another legendary lord you get to play with. It's an early game campaign goal of going around and trying to recruit these people that makes the faction more interesting to play, and I think that really elevates how hyped I am to play them. Confederation's a really fucking cool thing. Getting more lords to play with is really fun. Not getting to do that really hurts the rest of this faction quite a lot. Now, as much as I like the Warriors of Chaos roster, being focused into the part of it that involves Slaanesh for Azazel and Sigvald really doesn't sound good to me. They have a better unit roster, at least in my head, than Slaanesh does. I'm much more scared of their armies than anything I'm going to see Nakari fielding, except for the part where Nakari's in the army, because Nakari is quite a scary lord to fight. But yeah, the fact that these are the Slaaneshi-focused ones, and I really dislike Slaanesh units, is not great. I actually am kind of hype about Festus. I'm going to put Festus all the way up to very hype, because his insane AoE regeneration aura just is fucking terrifying. I'm sure he does other stuff, but I really enjoy the Vampire Lord's disgusting regen nonsense, and sure, it might make the campaign too easy. I might have some problems with them. But I also can't say that I'm not hyped about getting to play with this toy at least once. So I'm looking forward to playing with Festus, as I hear that the neuromechanics work much better with the Warriors of Chaos roster and with Festus' abilities than they do for Kugath Blakefather. As for the rest of this, I think I'm just kinda hyped about all three of them. Kolek Sun Eater gets to be higher. I don't really fully understand what Dragon Ogres are, and I don't fully understand what to expect out of Kolek, but I do fully understand that Kolek is big McHuge, and I'm looking forward to having him hit things in a way that's just very lizard-brained and not complicated. With Valkia and Village, they both have access to things where I just don't know what they are, the Changing of the Ways and Bloodletting. And I think I'm going to enjoy playing those campaigns. I'm kind of hyped for them. But the fact is that when I look at them in the campaign menu and based on what little knowledge I've absorbed through the community, I have no idea what to expect from them, aside from having shitty, unfun start positions for Valkia, and it's going to be fine, because it's not going to be shitty and unfun for the demons. I think of them as being terrible places to be, but that's because I was playing a high elf at the time. And as I play the game more, my knowledge of the map's going to get less biased and more accurate, and that's the reason Valkia gets to stay in kind of hyped and not fall down a little bit, because I do recognize me hating the Chaos Waste is a very high elven point of view. Now, getting into the Wood Elves, I'm going to start by moving them up to no opinion and just getting this to a scale where everyone fits on the screen because they're all falling off right now. I am decidedly not hyped for Dryka. If you tell me that your faction is defined by not getting to do diplomacy and everyone in your faction just basically isn't actually in your faction and you're alone, that sucks. I hate that. Additionally, they're not an island. Durthu is near them, but they don't really have friends in the neighborhood. Their unit roster doesn't strike me as super interesting. There's nothing about them where I look at them like, hell yeah, let's go. I decidedly look at them and I only feel the negative parts. I'm not expecting pain. I'm just not enthusiastic about it. For the Sisters of Twilight, when I think logically about it, I want to leave them in no opinion, but I'm hyped for them. Not super hyped, but I'm kind of hyped for them. I don't know why. They don't seem like they deserve it. I can't rationally explain why I think the Sisters of Twilight are going to be a good campaign, but I just sort of have that feeling. But I do legitimately have no opinion on Durthu. Durthu's just like a tree dude with marginally better tree dudes, and he lives in the mountains next to the trees. And that's fine and all. The dwarves are fine and all, but I don't have any strong opinions about that. Now, you might be unsurprised to hear this for putting Orion in the very hype category, because like many of the people in very hype, he excels at just being at war and trying to do ridiculous shit. You can see like a clear trend across this where one of two things has happened. You're either a top tier warmonger or you're just thematically sick as hell. Sometimes both. And I feel like that's fair, right? We're playing a fantasy game called Total War. Theoretically, I should be the most hyped about the things that are either really cool in the fantasy setting or the best at warring. And that's very much where this tier list has ended. And I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. Because partly I wanted to make this so that I can look back on in the future, but partly I wanted to make it so that in the future, I'm like, what campaign should I play? And instead of having to think, I can just open this and look and be like, near me, not right now, too close to me, not today. Oh, hey, I haven't been in this part of the map before. Let's play Bellacore. So I'm looking forward to using this as a tool to determine what campaigns I play in the future. And I'm also looking forward to just comparing this once I have gotten to play many more of the factions. And I hope you've enjoyed hearing me ramble about what the factions look like to a new player. This is a completely pointless, useless video, but my favorite sorts of tier lists are the ones that are thinly veiled ramblings disguised as a tier list. And that's what this is. This is a discussion video, barely even a tier list. It's just a tier list for my own use in the future. But I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble all the same. Thank you for watching, thank you to my one Patreon supporter Jeffrey B, and I'll see all of you in the next one.